connected. If we go for a more service-based economy, and uh, if people at the top rung of the economic ladder start reusing more stuff, and consuming less stuff, they become more frugal in their living. And if others can observe how they're consuming less and living more frugal lives, then uh, it has an impact on everyone in all the other demographics in the society. So it's to an extent it's living by example, I guess. That social innovations are really in how can we have a service-based economy that consumes less. That's my opinion. Okay. So Karmanya, what do you think about this thinking? Aditi and Karmanya. Aditi, Karmanya, any further ideas? Anyone else has any further ideas on this?
Yeah, Swastik,
So, thinking on the lines of it, I just thought a solution could be the fashion waste that's being overproduced that can be used to be recycled or
Which one?
reused.
What is being overproduced?
Fashion waste from
Uh-huh.
industries that
Yeah.
could be used to make bags to be
Yeah.
carried around and
Yeah.
recycled.
But on a hypothetical level, if you are saying waste from one industry is food for another industry, so if you're saying, okay, let's take fashion waste and make bags, in a way, it might promote more fashion and more consumption, if you think about it. Right? So why should fashion be made into cloth bags? Why can't fashion be more durable? And why can't people consume less fashion? Right? That's another way to
Yes.
think about it, isn't it? So okay, let's take all the waste from fashion and create one more industry out of it. So that only increases consumption in the fashion industry, right? So would that be the most appropriate solution to save environmental crises? I'm not sure about it. So yeah, all these things need a lot of deep thinking. That's what I'm trying to say. So social innovation, social entrepreneurship needs a lot of research, a lot of deep thinking, deep analysis before we even come up with some appropriate solutions. Otherwise, what will happen is our solutions might be very superficial.
Sunil sir, you are
Yeah.
able to check the chat box. Some of them are raising hands, some of them are
Oh,
writing
okay.
in
One
chat
second.
box.
Let me just. Where is the chat box? I've lost touch with.
I'll just
Where is the chat box?
message
Oh
box.
yeah, got it. Found it. So Athav Agarwal. I'm having an idea, but I won't be able to speak it in network. Can I write? Yes, yes, please do write it in the chat box. So, Swastik, you've been wanting to speak for some time. Swastik.
Yes, sir. So another issue that I was pondering upon is that the plastic industry, as bad as it also employs millions of people, right? So if you want
Mhm.
to shift consumption away from the plastic industry, you have to provide alternative livelihood
Yeah.
solutions for them. And a lot of these people who are employed by the industry, very few of them are actually skilled labor or have educational degrees.
Yeah.
So that is also a big issue, that you have to provide education. I think that also adds on to the education point. So you have to
Yeah.
provide them with education so they can form livelihoods after this industry dwindles down.
I completely agree with that. And it is, yeah, I mean, it is an issue. And we'll come to it soon because I think education is important. And in India's context, perhaps there's a learning crisis going on at the minute, and we'll talk more about it. But that's an interesting one because if you are if you are taking going to take them away from the plastics industry, the manufacturing sector, and where will they go, what will happen to the livelihoods. I mean, the thing is, if you deeply think about it, Swastik, I think um, okay, so today, for example, and we'll talk more about it, let's say healthcare insurance in India, it's only 38% who sorry, I think it's about, I don't know, is it 38% who have healthcare, and I think 60%, 62% still don't have healthcare insurance in India. Largely, even that 38% is government provided healthcare insurance, which probably is not very effective. What I'm trying to say here is that people lack a universal basic um, access, to universal access to basic things in life like health, education, food, water, whatever. Now, obviously, the way you're thinking, Swastik, is people need jobs, right? To actually go for these basic necessities in life. So if they're taken away from one industry, they should be put into another industry. We need to reskill them. We need to re-employ them, right? Now, rethink what is happening today. Okay, so what is happening today is, it's even compared to 30 years ago, the situation today is very different. There's a lot of cronyism happening. It's actually absolutely true. That rich are becoming rich and poor are becoming poorer. The middle class is shrinking, right? There is increased wealth in the hands of a few. Okay, and there is, to some extent, they're doing philanthrocapitalism, which we'll talk a little bit later. They're doing philanthropic activities, but is that enough? What is happening in the world? Do we need to rethink, because this is going to continue in the future, right? This, we cannot, if things become more automated, if we move more to a service-based economy, and if the rich keep becoming rich and the money is in the hands of a few, we need to rethink institutions. We need to rethink governance, right? We need to think about universal basic income. Not everyone is going to have a job in the world. Not everyone is going to be full-time employed. Not everyone is going to work 5 days a week, right? People may work 1 day a week, 2 day a week. Many people may not have proper jobs. Again, building up a scenario here. Okay, so we need long-term solutions. Like reskilling and putting them in another industry will again promote more industrialization. But if and we might build a lot of capital assets, and then what might happen is, in a few years, that industry might die, and then you'll have idle assets, right? So what do we do then? We wasted a lot of money and effort into reskilling people when industries are fast changing. So I do feel that a lot of these solutions for these kinds of problems was about employment, about jobs, is not about creating new industries. I think it's about proper governance. It's about managing basic needs of people, we like, I was just hearing yesterday. Okay, so what has happened is, some governments, this is in the news, by the way, this is credible news sources. So I was just reading yesterday that a lot of energy companies in the world have been suing governments because their strategies about climate mitigation has impacted on their profits. Okay, up to about 15 or 20 billion, they've been, that's the value that they've been suing the governments for, because the profits have been impacted because of government strategies to mitigate climate crisis. So it's interesting, and these things, why should we allow these things? And some of these loops and gaps should be closed, and institutions should be strengthened, so that everyone's basic needs are met, not just a few. Okay, so that's my thinking. Any other thoughts, Swastik, on that? What do you think? I mean, is that a valid point that I've just presented?
Yes, sir. Sir, I like to point about the philanthropic activities, but so I read an article that a lot of the times people start becoming dependent on philanthropy, and then they suppose some initiative is started in which, like, there are a lot of government initiatives in which they hire a lot of unemployed labor, unskilled labor, and then use their help to build highways and whatever they need to. So instead of that, they can run large scale reskilling camps, so that they can always fall back on a trade that they know, these laborers. Because if they don't know any skill, they're always going to be dependent on someone for their work.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, again, that ability to reskill, and when we look at it when we come to education, but reskilling would depend on very strong primary education, isn't it? Because if you don't build the foundations well, then how do you actually get the ability, the capacity to reskill yourselves? And again, the owners, if you think about it deeply, Swastik, it goes back to the government and public institutions to actually strengthen, for example, our schooling system, because make the foundation strong, and then people can look after themselves. If you don't make the foundations strong, then everyone will go out for the handouts policy, which again is ineffective, as you've just alluded to. It's again, handouts doesn't work all the time. So we education is a basic access, and the education systems also need to be strengthened. Especially the primary education system. Most people in India can't even, if I'm correct, the the whole mathematical skills or the reading skills are stuck at class 2 for many Indians in rural India. So that is a issue. That is a learning crisis. So how do you reskill even people? If their education is stuck at class 2. Right?
So, but
So,
in my opinion, not necessarily an academic related degree, but as I said, a trade. So something like carpentry or plumbing or basic electric work. So I don't think that requires a lot of basic education, as long as you said, I think some level till class 2 or 3 should be required so that they're basic literate. But beyond that, I think working with their hands is something a lot of people can learn.
yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's we need more vocational stuff. That is absolutely right. But the fact is that the important fact is that whatever like there's a huge difference between the rich and the poor in India, and earning 10K or 20K a month is not going to meet all their aspirations. I think there's a huge debate going on, especially post-COVID, whether we need to increase that universal basic income, because if someone is earning 20-30 lakhs and then there are people who are earning 1 lakh or 2 lakh a year, that's a huge gap, in pay scales. It is a huge gap, in pay scales. So most people at the lower run will still not be able to meet the basic necessities of life, though they learn basic trades, and though they have vocational. Healthcare is a huge thing, and we'll come to it soon, because at that 1 lakh salary a year or 2 lakh salary a year, you can't meet your complete healthcare needs. It's impossible, right? So even with some basic government insurance, you still have to put out a lot of out-of-pocket expenses. So the point I was trying to make, Swastik, is jobs are there, but they're in the society that we live in, which is too capitalistic, and the money is now concentrated in the hands of a few. I believe 70% of India's wealth is in 0.5% of the population's hands. That is interesting stats, but that's a world over thing as well, not just India. Plutocracy, that's what it's named. We live in a very plutocratic society at the minute. So this is my point. How do we strengthen institutions so that people have more equitable access? We're not talking about equality. I'll come to the definition difference between equality and equity very soon. Equality is you give equal access to everyone, but equity is something like, if we need to give more access to someone who more things to someone who has less, who can't afford, or who has less access, right? We need to give a higher ladder to someone who doesn't have the capacity or the capability, and then we give a smaller ladder to someone who is more capable and has more capacity. So it's not just about giving equal opportunities, it's about giving more facilities to someone who actually really lack those facilities, right? So that's the point I was trying to make. So that's where I think so that kind of lays the basic ground, in my opinion, about where social innovations are actually needed. So before I move on to more of where social innovations are needed, and we'll take 3 areas and we'll go through each of them, and we'll have a nice P2P discussion within the classroom. But entrepreneurship is really about mechanics versus passion. Most of us are unlikely to experience. Can you see my second slide where it says mechanics versus passion?
Actually, Sunil sir, your slides are not visible. Only Google Drive screen is visible.
Oh,
Yeah.
I wonder why. 1
Open
second.
the slide in the other tab.
Yeah.
Okay, let me share the correct tab. I'm going to stop presenting and then present again. I don't know why that happened, but let's do this.
Good afternoon, Professor Sunil.
Hi, Mansi. Hi.
Just till you get your slides back on. Hello, all. I'm Mansi here from SEI, and I would like to thank Professor Sunil for taking his time and interacting with you all. Yeah, Professor Sunil, just before you go ahead, I just wanted to quickly check with you. Sorry for this small interruption, but as you might be aware, we are having another session for SIOM by Professor Chinta.
That's
But
correct. Yeah.
he's not replied back on the confirmation. So I was just wondering if you can share his number or something, or if you can just quickly message him. I sent in an email, but
Sure. No, he's aware. I think we spoke yesterday. So
okay.
he was looking forward to it. So
All right. Okay. All right. No problem.
Yeah, I'll.
Yeah. Okay.
If,
Thank you so much.
if there's any problem, just WhatsApp me and then I'll WhatsApp
Sure.
you this.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Bye, Mansi. Bye. So the slide is visible now?
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, okay, fab. That's better. Yeah, it's funny how, because I think when I was sharing the tab, I thought everyone could see it, but now it's come on my presenter view as well here. Okay, that's good. Right. So the thing is, most of us are unlikely to experience a wrong, injustice. We're all within the university, within the walls of the university. Personally, I do feel that most students are very, even at Leeds Beckett, where I'm, most students are very unlikely to experience wrongs and injustices. So I do feel that it is difficult to simply learn how to be a social entrepreneur in the classroom. That's why I want to keep this session very reflective. What I don't want to do is give you lots of frameworks, theories, models. And we usually do that in a lot of traditional modules, but that's not what I want to do. What I feel is passion and purpose are critical, although it is far easier to learn the mechanics of social entrepreneurship, and most of which is derived from traditional entrepreneurship. The mechanics, for example, business models. If you actually go onto Google, you'll see that there's also a more template for social business model canvas. Whole business model canvas thing is hugely hyped up in my opinion, but you will see that they've adapted it to social business model canvas as well. Then there's a lot of talk about elevator pitches, hackathons, marathons, whatever you want to call it. Okay, it's interesting, but that's mechanics. I think, and a lot of the traditional entrepreneurial stuff doesn't deal with a passion or calling in life. You may be the best person to solve a problem because you're armed with all the analytical skills, but it's of little use if you don't find the problem and you're not passionate about the problem. So in my opinion, finding purpose is the toughest part of the process, and there are few shortcuts here, other than to leave your comfort zone. It's important to get away from your comfort zone and get yourself out on the field. You can't experience inefficient healthcare in the private hospitals of Pune, for example, but you will if you spend hard time in the primary healthcare facilities in rural areas, right? So the mechanics world, kind of centers around business models, the quest for data, for metrics. There's an obsession with scale and impact. It's all about how do we grow, how do we show that we've created so much impact, we have saved so many lives, we have generated so much revenue per person, whatever it is. So there is, interestingly, what I don't want to deal. If you'd been in one of my sessions 5 years ago, I would have been talking about social return on investment. But as academics, we keep reflecting on over the value of these ideas, right? So there's even a measurement called social return on investment, which converts non-monetary benefits into monetary proxies, right? So lots of tables, numbers, graphs, theories, which score low on most people's motivational scale. So I believe that the aha moment often comes from doing and experiencing. You have to be there in the field. So innovation and entrepreneurship starts with passion, and we ought to focus, we really need to focus more on that passion element. It's not always about mechanics. I do feel it's it's not all about learning the mechanics of entrepreneurship in the classroom. It's about going there and actually doing it in the field, observing. And observing is really important. You really need to understand the problem deep, carefully. But of course, you can't keep endlessly debating about the problem. You need to do something about it as well. So can you see my next slide now? Can entrepreneurs save the world? Okay.
Yes,
So
yes.
I'll put it back quickly to the students again. What do you guys think? Can entrepreneurs save the world?
I believe they can.
And how?
So if everyone does their bit, there's definitely a change that can happen.
So if entrepreneurs are mindful that the businesses they create, and if they're mindful of how they impact others, and if they're doing that in a positive way, I think a big change can be brought around.
Yeah. But does everyone have to start a startup?
No, sir.
Okay. So what does that mean, that entrepreneurs can be within large organizations as well?
I think
In the
so.
government as well?
Definitely,
Yes, I
yes.
feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because what the current processes and systems are in place, I think they also need to be certainly changed or maybe modified in order to get everything on track. Otherwise, starting up new things won't only help.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, you can't change government institutions from outside, isn't it? So you have to be within the government to change those institutions. So if you innovate around, for example, universal basic income, there's something which you can only do within the government. You can't do it from outside the government. Obviously, you can have public-private partnerships to facilitate such things. That's one way to think about it. How do I work closely with the government through a PPP mode to affect some of these changes? But ultimately, I think, entrepreneurs catalyze. They can be outside or they can be inside, whatever it is. But the entrepreneurs are, catalysts, in my opinion. So maybe, you're right. We're not engaging in hyperbole when we say entrepreneurs can save the world. Entrepreneurial mindset is absolutely wonderful, tool to use to solve what seems to be unsolvable problems. Everything from education to health to changing our democratic institutions. Okay, they all seem unsolvable problems, but that's where entrepreneurship really comes in. By leveraging resources others have developed or coming up with their own technology solutions, entrepreneurs can create new solutions that solves the problems of common people. But the fact is, many of today's technological solutions, and we discussed this earlier, right, don't just help entrepreneurs innovate with new products and services. They also kind of make it easier to keep a business running very, very smoothly. You cut costs by automating mundane tasks, and that leaves more time to focus efforts on important problem solving initiatives. So that's I think when we was discussing with Swastik, we were saying how things are going to become more automated in the future, and we probably not have as many jobs in the future. Maybe that's a scenario. It's a very it's a very probable scenario that we won't have all the kinds of jobs that we have today, right? And then obviously that might lead to more societal problems, right? So how, therefore, you can cut costs on one side, fine, you can cut mundane tasks, you can automate, it will save costs. Entrepreneurs can solve that, but entrepreneurs also need to be mindful of the spillover effects that all these entrepreneurial solutions have. So that needs entrepreneurs to also solve one more important problem-solving initiatives on the basic needs of people, right? So today's resources and opportunities can certainly help entrepreneurs solve the world's biggest challenges. There's no dearth of money, right? There's so much money in the world today, right? But unfortunately, it is concentrated, as I was saying, in the hands of a few. We have really extracted and exploited the resources of the earth and created a lot of wealth in the society today, but it's not percolating and diffusing everywhere. So nothing compares to the unique mindset shared by all the entrepreneurs who can solve the world's biggest challenges. Entrepreneurs are born problem solvers. They're always looking for new, better ways of doing things. One could argue that the most successful social entrepreneurs, they challenge themselves to be open-minded, approach problems with a filter that is void of kind of established tendencies and stigmas. They're unconventional thinkers in a way, right? They revolt. That's the whole idea. And if you want any originality in the world today, you can't go with the status quo. So you need unconventional thinkers who are not limited by the system. So if democratic institutions need to be changed, that's the job of an entrepreneur. Okay, and if we need more fair elections, that's the job of an entrepreneur. Obviously entrepreneurs have created the problems, all the Facebook and WhatsApp, whatever, all the fake news that is spreading. But if we need fair elections, we need fair democratic institutions, and again, entrepreneurs have to come up with solutions and challenge the existing systems that technology itself has created, right? With fresh ideas and with fresh techniques. So that's the job of an entrepreneur. So most entrepreneurs, this is the for argument I'm giving. I'll also come to the against argument why entrepreneurs may not be able to save the world. Okay, so because I need to be reflective here. So and one of the other arguments is most entrepreneurs seek dramatic, we talk about disruption, right? Not incremental change. And this mindset embraces so entrepreneurs embrace big goals here with this mindset, and they are willing to learn from failure, and because failure is not for the faint-hearted. If you want to make disruption, you want to change a healthcare system in India, it's not for the faint-hearted. It's a huge, big task, right? So it is what defines a successful entrepreneur. It is the key to using all available resources to drive innovative solutions to all kinds of problems. Today's situation can feel bleak with all the COVID and everything, but it is not a time for entrepreneurs to give up. I think maybe many people are thinking, okay, after all this COVID crisis ends, maybe I'll get a stable, nice 9-to-5 job because things are so uncertain in today's world. You may be asked to hunker down physically, but that doesn't mean you can't keep working towards meaningful solutions. I mean, you can keep your job on one side, keep working towards meaningful solutions on the other side. That will improve the world, right? And an argument is few are better equipped for the challenge than a real entrepreneur. So many policymakers and a lot of experts believe that effective large-scale change needs to be driven from the top down. Deep planning, big problems require big solutions. It needs to maybe largely come from the government or the very super rich. Okay, but experience shows that that is not the case. These huge problems involve so many fundamental elements, constituencies, that trying to organize them to move forward together could collapse because of political ideologies. Government change, then plans change, right? Today we have whatever Pradhan Mantri Yojana, Swasthya Yojana, and tomorrow we might have another scheme. Okay, so governments change, plans change, ideologies change, right? So, and then there's infighting, there's competing personal agendas. So, a lot of, I don't believe that, a lot of stuff needs to be top down. I think it's entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs who could also drive these things from the bottom up. So if we look at, three of the big problems of our time, and, that's healthcare, education, energy. We are in an energy crisis. Energy prices have soared. I'm sure when I was in India, everyone was discussing about the petrol prices. It's on 100 rupees plus now, isn't it? So it is a grand problem of our time. They've all fundamentally resisted top-down intervention, actually, and all of them are now trying to yield to local or community-based bottom-up experimentation. So we have large numbers of people who are really thinking about these issues. Education, especially learning crisis in India. We need many communities to take it in their own hands and improve learning within their communities, right? So we don't want to stop that, but we need to understand that deep thought of social problems needs to get merged with evidence. Small action that generates the evidence helps us figure out where to go. So you understand the problem and then you just go and do it. If you have the passion, you go and just do it. So massive change can evolve from the bottom up. In 2011, there was the Arab Spring, right? There was a lot of protests against governments in Arabian countries, right? So in the Middle East, and it was maybe at the time people thought it was a powerful indication of the ability of people to self-organize entrepreneurially. Okay, they were self-organizing entrepreneurially. Of course, they use technology as well to obtain what they want. It's a different thing. They may have not achieved everything that they wanted, but at least they organized entrepreneurially. So one major advantage of taking small start steps is that it helps to overcome what we have come to think of as the tyranny of the optimal right answer. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just process of experimentation. We just have to keep experimenting with small things. Start small, that's the thinking, but take a step. And we desperately want certain things to be better, and then what happens? We turn to policymakers, planners, and the problem is, this is one of the biggest problems. These experts will always not. You just look at the COVID crisis. When in the beginning, this is what really irritates me, right? In the beginning, WHO said no need to wear masks, because if you wear masks, you're touching your hands everywhere, and it's going to spread more. Okay. And then every government went its own way and said, oh, everyone needs to wear masks, because there was a national political agenda going on there. And in fact, this is a very stupid thing. When I was coming back, and I just want to say this actually, when I was coming back in the flight, the Indian government had stipulated that if you're sitting in the middle seat, you have to wear a gown, the PPE gown, whatever. And everyone has to wear a mask and then a visor, and, it's too much stuff going on. It was very stuffy in the flight. But when you're eating, it's all off. Your mask is off, your visor is off, and you're probably eating for about half an hour to 1 hour in the flight, right? That's enough time to actually spread the virus. So I really don't understand. Of course, we need to take all the protection we can, wash our hands, have hygiene and everything. But the economic agenda is really clashing with the political agenda, and then the experts don't agree with each other. Okay. So while some tell you something can be done, others say it can't be done, or it will have horrible side effects, or someone else has tried something similar, it did not work. So, all sorts of things you might hear when you're trying to socially innovate. So the problem here is not the future is unpredictable. each side is near certain about the prediction. Every expert thinks my prediction is going to be right. All these models that came out during COVID, that it's going to increase so much, and nothing. I mean, I don't know how many of them are really correct, but it's just that these predictions, when it comes to entrepreneurship, utterly, so when it comes to social problems, they really contradict with each other. Okay, one expert is certain about something and another is certain about exactly the opposite. So the result is an image of the future that is potentially predictable to some degree, but effectively unknowable because of the lack of any common ground. So I just want to give an example. So I have a friend in Bangalore. We are also business partners. He owns a company called Axonet Global Systems. Nothing to do with, even he makes EEG devices. He also has a forensic side of business, where he has kind of polygraph kind of machines, but it's their own invention actually. But he's a very charitable person. He doesn't run a big company. He has 50 employees. It's kind of a small scale, very research intensive company he runs, but he has a very charitable disposition. So in the COVID crisis thing, he didn't think too much. He was like, I need to do something about it, and he immediately went and set up an oxygen center, a COVID care center. And then the next step was, when the oxygen crisis was becoming a real issue in India, he set up an oxygen plant as well, and he raised money. It wasn't a problem. He just went and did it. He wasn't thinking, how COVID numbers is going to increase so much. We won't need these facilities. Of course, now the government is saying the numbers have come down, so we'll take back the facilities from you, because they gave him a school and an old school and a whole old healthcare center which was defunct, to actually run his operations. So they're saying now, we'll maybe take back the facilities. But when he did it, he wasn't thinking, the government is one day going to take away my facilities and I'm going to build this oxygen plant, it's going to be gone. But he wasn't thinking like that. He was like, okay, I need to do something. And he just went and did it, right? So the result is an image of the future that is potentially predictable to some degree. He's built an oxygen center. Now that oxygen center, those facilities can always be used for local healthcare systems, right? So if you just keep thinking about the future and keep doing all this modeling about what the future is going to look like, it will only create an impasse. Nothing happens. You instead just go and do it, right? So the way to break this inaction is with small. He didn't build the oxygen center. He just built a 10-bed facility to start with. Then it became a 40-bed facility. Then he opened one more center with a 30-bed or 40-bed facility. And then he opened oxygen centers in both places, right? So the way to break this inaction is with small, smart steps that are limited by acceptable laws. Okay, by acceptable laws, you mean, okay, what is the money that I can actually lose at the minute, or invest? Obviously, it depended on donations and how much donations he had at the time. So you don't know what is going to happen. And the only way you're going to find out what is going to happen is take a step. Okay, take a step. He took a step and then more donations poured in. That's how he worked, on the problem, and see where you are and figure out what the next step is. Okay, so this argues for taking a number of new small smart steps, a pilot project here, a different way of doing things over there, to see what happens, and then positive outcomes can be built upon the experiments that show some real promise. So in a world, where nobody really knows, you want to generate as many solutions as possible. So initially it was just a care center where people would be looked after for some time and then they would be sent off to the hospital. Okay, but then after a while, when the oxygen facility came in, he was able to do more things, and he was able to kind of look after people even better within his care facilities before sending them to the larger hospitals. So in a world where nobody really knows, you want to generate as many solutions as possible. Taking such smart steps is an essential key to making the impossible possible. So smart action in the face of the unknown is better than arrested progress due to more debate. You don't want to keep on debating, is it going to work, not work, is code going to last, not last. There's no point in debating, just go and do it. Okay. So everybody who's intellectually oriented will say, oh, no way, when you're facing complicated situations, it is better to think it through, because until you understand it, you're likely to take a disastrous step. Okay. But small steps are not disastrous, even if they're wrong. Big, of course, the fatality rates compared to people dying from other diseases might still be less in COVID, or the mortality rates could be less, but big high impact ideas have their place. He has built an oxygen facility which can be used for other things, right? So high impact ideas have their place. There is no evidence that it is only through big ideas that we resolve issues. Okay. I can give another big, interesting, large, big example. In 1972, Jimmy Carter, he was the president of America then. He called for wholesale changes in the behavior of Americans to fundamentally reduce their dependence on foreign oil. Okay, so what happened as a result was the economy of cars went up dramatically, and certain conservation efforts became mandatory. Obviously, America is still dependent on foreign oil. It is more today, but at the same time, taking those small steps by both individuals and organizations has been very important in reducing the carbon footprint. And of course, of course, as a society, we're consuming more. That's an entirely different story. We're consuming more cars, we're consuming more oil and more petrol. But that's a completely different story. But people are still mindful that they need to reduce carbon footprint, so they go for more economically better cars, right? Things that have better mileage, that have less CO2 emissions, because these are all declared when you're buying a car. You look for all this information, right? So these smart actions show much more promise for being able to address these issues than our ability to be able to move big policy initiatives through government. You can't go and say, Jimmy Carter, at that point, of course, he wouldn't have said, let's go and introduce a lot of mass public transportation in the US. US is a huge country. It has the population is not, is spread out, right? It's impossible to have mass rapid transportation systems in the US. So it was 1972 as well. He didn't go and say, let's have mass rapid transportation everywhere and everyone should go, most people should go and commute by buses. It's like, okay, let's increase the mileage of cars. That was his initiative. That was a smart step, right? So rather than big steps, take small steps. That's the idea. So that was the for argument that, yes, entrepreneurs can save the world, but there is an against argument as well. The media especially has a growing obsession with entrepreneurs, and I keep hearing this from my own, of course I teach entrepreneurship, but I keep hearing this from my own folks at the incubator in my university. Entrepreneurship is here to stay, and there's a lot more funding coming in for entrepreneurship. There's a huge growing obsession. They're the new rock stars of the economy, kind of thing. But of course, as I've said before, entrepreneurship is not about startup. It's about a mindset. Make change wherever you are. Okay. So during the 2009 downturn, I don't know. I think a lot of you might just be babies or whatever, 5-year-olds at that point of time. But during the 2009, when there was the economic recession 12 years ago, a lot of people who were laid off, who were unable to find jobs, rebranded themselves first as consultants, and then when that didn't work, and they became lifestyle coaches or entrepreneurs. So just helping someone become an entrepreneur became entrepreneurial. Okay, so inspired by whoever was on the cover of Forbes magazine, like Forbes magazine, all these top 10 entrepreneurs, top 20 entrepreneurs, whatever list, they would find the passion and throw themselves into building a business um, with some enthusiasm, that only a fresh entrepreneur can muster. But within a year and a half, most of them had burnt through their lifetime savings. They would have taken a debt, alienated friends and families by trying to sell, by trying to sell to or borrow from them, and close down their businesses. So then they return to the workforce to lick their wounds. So perhaps those were the lucky ones who went back to work, but the rest of us just stumbled on. It's just not a negative take on entrepreneurship here. It is, in fact, the reality for most people who start businesses where failure is near certainty, right? Most businesses don't survive, most startups don't survive. And while all business owners may understand that intellectually, they might, stats say that, right? They won't understand its true toll until they actually experience the death throes of a business, how unpleasant it is to lay off staff and dealing with unpaid suppliers, right? That's very nasty. So now I think we are still, COVID has created another economic crisis. The media is once again full of stories of, rags to riches entrepreneurs who have used COVID to actually do something entrepreneurial, make a difference, and they're saving the world. And a whole new army of people who should know better will throw themselves into creating a business despite facing the sort of odds that make casinos kind of look kind. Casinos are not kind, it's gamble, right? So they're gambling. I think that the governments are also gambling when they are saying, okay, let's make everyone entrepreneurs. But obviously, again, it goes back to my earlier statement. Why promote entrepreneurship so much? In the startup mindset of entrepreneurship, when entrepreneurship can be done everywhere. Entrepreneurship is a mindset, right? Okay, it's about solving local problems. It's not about solving the entire world's problems, because problems have their own local manifestations. And it's not about becoming the next big technology company. I think that's the idea that governments have. Let's create the next big technology company, while you're not solving the basic problems that your population faces, right? So again, what I'm trying to say here is entrepreneurship is a mindset, and that mindset doesn't need private enterprises to start businesses up. Governments need to solve the basic problems through creating an entrepreneurial mindset and working with the citizens and communities so that healthcare, education, these problems can be solved. So arguably, traditional way of entrepreneurship is not the answer to saving the world. You do not need to be an entrepreneur to have an entrepreneurial mindset. Okay, so in fact, it may be best for you to not start a business. Solving problems creatively has been best done by employees, citizens, and you would be hard pressed to find a chief executive or a business owner who isn't focused on attracting the best minds for the company. Everyone wants the best talent, right? So, and then providing them the environments to do the best work. So the employee that entrepreneurs often mock, like, oh, 9-to-5 job and mechanical life, the same boring routine thing, right? So the employee we mock often has resources that entrepreneurs who start off could only dream of to pursue, to solve a problem that the world faces, right? So, of course, I'm an entrepreneurial. I teach entrepreneurship, right? So that's what I teach for my bread and butter. That all my modules and all my courses are entrepreneurship. But I tend to be reflective in my teaching, And obviously I have a lot of respect for those that start businesses up and contribute to the economy, and for those that leave it all on the line, they give up everything, sacrifice everything, succeed. All my respect. But I was saying, my friend Chetan, who owns this business in Bangalore, Axonet, great. He's doing a great business. He's very technology savvy guy, has a great business, but on the side he does very interesting things like the COVID care center. In fact, he also worked with Plan International on launching an educational software for rural India. So these kinds of entrepreneurs, inspire me every day with their accomplishments. I want entrepreneurs to be recognized by media. It's these kinds of entrepreneurs that I want media to recognize, not just the Facebooks, Mark Zuckerbergs. So I want people must be inspired and go out and start their own businesses, but it's not for everyone. And the current glorification of entrepreneurship is bordering on psychophantic, I think, in my opinion. And I don't think it's healthy for either the entrepreneurs or those aspiring to become one. Entrepreneurs will save the world. Isn't it enough to deliver value to customers, employees, ordinary citizens, community, right? So proclamations like entrepreneurs can save the world fail spectacularly to prepare the next generation of entrepreneurs for the realities that the world actually is going to face. So it used to be that people who had created a successful business were entrepreneurs. Today, unfortunately, just being unemployed with an idea seems to entitle you to use that moniker. It's become institutionalized. The whole word of, not just entrepreneurship, the whole world of social entrepreneurship has become institutionalized. Everyone is a social entrepreneur and everyone is an entrepreneur, right? So and there was an article in the Forbes where it said that protesters as I was saying earlier, protesters in the Middle East self-organized entrepreneurially. So what does that mean? It means one man's freedom fighter is another man's entrepreneur. Okay, so how long until a poor terrorist can rebrand themselves as a lean entrepreneur, right? If you can think of it like that as well. So all my entrepreneurial friends and myself who teach entrepreneurship, I would be happy to actually listen to them, observe them, and kind of share their success stories. And it serves the purpose of entrepreneurship. That's why I was saying entrepreneurship is about experience, it's about observation, is about actually going and just doing it. And that's, I feel, in my opinion, that's the best way of learning entrepreneurship. But if everyone if everyone thinks they're an entrepreneur, right, and label themselves as an entrepreneur, what it just does is it kind of increases our sensitive egos. Okay, and that's not very useful, because if we want to solve the world's problems, we need to be more empathetic about the world's problems and really solve world's problems, and not just call ourselves entrepreneurs and kind of increase our egos saying, oh, we are an entrepreneur, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a social entrepreneur, I'm a social innovator, right? I have a startup, everything is a startup these days. So what I'm trying to say is, you may have a startup, but you may be completely broke. It's convenient to forget that we're often completely broke and trying to innovate while juggling a dozen plates. Whereas the employees we mock, they have the resources we can only dream of in pursuing a problem and solving the problem. So so there is an against argument as well here, and even venture capitalists are who they get carried away by all this buzz. Actually, the investors, the funders. So these days the whole idea is, okay, let's build a minimum viable product, right? Bare minimum product, and then experiment with it. So even venture capitalists have started focusing on these minimum viable entrepreneurs. Why give 30 companies $500,000 when you can give 300 companies 50K? Okay, you only need to find a few of them to survive the hail of bullets. Okay, while and when they'll return you a good massive return on investment, and then there'll be many more companies that will fail, right? So again, investors themselves are promoting a lot of failure, right? With this minimum viable product idea, which again I've come to disbelieve that this is not the way that social entrepreneurship is solving big problems, but of course small steps, but more local community steps. But I don't know, how this whole idea of minimally viable product is useful and effective in these situations. And when my friend Chetan built this COVID center, it wasn't a minimum viable product. He built a COVID center that actually catered to people. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to try 1% and see what happens, and then I'll increase 5 people. No, he was like, this place needs 15 beds now. I'm going to build a 15-bed facility, right? So I'm not. So I think this whole these consultants, coaches, so-called people. As an academic, I'm free to present my opinions. I'm presenting my opinions here. I think reflection has vanished, and entrepreneurs need to have an entrepreneurial mindset, and they need to be more reflective. But just go and do it as well. It's not like endless debate, So the whole minimum viable product idea is, why invest in a few companies and put more money? You can put into many startups. It doesn't matter if most of them fail, okay, but there'll be a few who will give high return on investment. So and even governments have hopped onto that bandwagon. Every country is at least paying some lip service to encourage entrepreneurship on its shows, because entrepreneurs will save the world, or at least help the economy. So that's the ideology. So that's the against argument. So there's the for argument, and there is also the against argument. But putting it both together, I think what I'm trying to say is entrepreneurship. I think what is coming out here is entrepreneurship is a mindset. You can do entrepreneurship anywhere. It doesn't have to be a startup. Okay, it doesn't. It can be more community-driven local solutions that you solve, and you just go and do it. That's the whole idea and notion of entrepreneurship. So I think I've kind of spoken a lot here, just on that one slide. So is everyone still here? Sabiha, any questions on that? Any thoughts on that? Swastik, you have any thoughts on what I've just discussed?
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add one thing. I feel like more than providing solutions, we only manage things. Because if you see if I go back to the idea of polythene, the moment it was created, it was thought of as a solution. But if we look at the current scenario, it doesn't really seem an appropriate option. So if we compare things, we only manage things instead of giving solutions, because there are different kinds of people, and there are many different differences in opinions. So we have to look at what is the best. What are the pros, and act accordingly.
Yes, absolutely. I think that what you're saying is we only take short-term approaches. Is that what you're trying to say, Hardik? When the problem appears, let's manage it superficially rather than take a long-term approach and get to the root cause.
Correct, sir. That also, and plus, sir, we were having a discussion on whether to I mean, if we ban the polythenes,
Yeah.
it will have an impact. It will have an impact on the
Jobs.
employment. So so what I mean is, the correct solution here would be to think, if the world, if protecting the globe is a more important aspect than protecting the jobs, so we could then arrive at a solution accordingly.
Absolutely, you're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, just I know, for example, when Vedanta was trying to mine in Orissa, there was a lot of opposition, isn't it, from the local tribes people who considered their place very, very sacred, right? So do we protect those basic? That's how they want to live. Do we go and intervene and say, you need to progress and you need you need to have more developed lifestyles? Probably not. That's their lifestyle, that's their livelihood, that's what they believe in. So we don't have to create new industries that cater to the more sophisticated people while impacting on others' livelihoods, right? So how do we balance it? I think that is a huge challenge for the world. I mean, the same thing is happening everywhere. You go on, like, I mean, it's a related thing. Like, for plastics, you need oil. So where does oil come from? It comes from places where, some of the places oil comes from are, and a lot of minerals and metals come from, are inhabited by, local indigenous communities, right? Like iron comes, a lot of iron is mined in Amazon, and indigenous lives are being affected. Oil, the Trans-Alaska, sorry, I can't remember the pipeline that had a lot of opposition, which was being built on the borders of Canada and US, but it was inhabited by a lot of indigenous people who opposed it. Right? So if you really think about it, it's connected. Plastic comes from oil, but when oil is affecting indigenous people, right? And do we, to improve our lifestyles, do we actually need to impact their livelihoods? They're happy with their livelihoods. We don't need to create extra jobs for them, right? Or you're saying, okay, let's create an industry and these people can come and work in the industry. You don't need to create an extra job for them just to make our lives in the cities, or the middle class and the rich, better. So how do we, and the only way we can solve this is if we consume less, and then it kind of has a spillover impact on the total production. And when the total production goes down, then probably we don't need to extract so many more resources from the earth, and then we can keep the livelihoods and the traditional ways of living intact, right? So that's another thinking mode. Hardik, what do you think of that?
Yeah, correct, sir.
Okay, Sahil, yeah.
Yes, sir. I just want to add that if entrepreneurs can save the world is quite debatable, because entrepreneurs seeks to actually find the gap and then tries to solve the problem. And while seeking and while that process, that it is not sure that that gap or that problem solving methods are correct, they can also pose threats to lives of many people. For example, taking the example of education, in the COVID scenario, it went online, and the teachers would like to teach traditionally on the green boards and the whiteboards were facing a huge difficulty while adapting the new technology. And the young professional, the young students who were not interested in teaching before have started teaching because of COVID and lockdown and that stuff. So these things can actually pose this problem, and we are not sure that those solutions can actually help the people who were before in this job scenario. So yeah, it is quite subjective if entrepreneur can save the world or not.
Yeah. I think Zoom had become, it was when no one had heard of Zoom before, but Zoom became one of the top entrepreneurial solutions.
And also, sir, adding to it, technological advancement is also one of the things which can pose a threat to the people. Also, the obsolete technology. Before there were DVDs and VCRs which were used. Now those are piled up and just obsolete, and that is also known as e-waste, which is possessing threat to the environment. Because there's no way to recycle those technology as it is obsolete, and dumping is not an option in the long term.
Yeah. I mean, the e-waste recycling is very nascent at the minute. It can be, it's not economically feasible at the minute. That's the issue. how do we make it more economically feasible? When it's only when there is more. So why do we dump e-waste? Think about it. Because we have backyard recycling, right? If you actually think about it, there's a huge complex in Africa. I think it's Zambia, if I'm correct. I can't remember, Zambia or Tanzania. It's called Abugo Blishe. That's the place. It's got the largest fruit market, and next to it is the largest dumping ground for electronics and electronic backyard recycling of it. Open. It's kind of an open recycling where everything is burned. It's a huge place. Children are really impacted by it, and there's a lot of societal issues, gender issues, and there's all sorts of issues there, health issues, and what I'm trying to say is, how does it get dumped there? It's all coming from Europe and all the rich countries. They just ship it. There's no checks that these governments really do when this waste goes and gets dumped in Abgablishe in Africa, right? Let them deal with it. They don't have this country doesn't have a problem accepting waste, and let them deal with it. That's the kind of mindset we have. We're not thinking globally. So that's why that may be one of the reasons, because it's cheap to do that. Dump it somewhere else. It's create problems for someone else. Some other poor country in the world, right? That's how we're thinking, and that was an issue even with ship. If you remember, if you think about it, the shipyard breaking thing. Okay, where does it go? Bangladesh. In India has got rid of it now, but most of the shipyard breaking happens in shipbreaking happens in Bangladesh. It creates a lot of toxic chemicals, and it creates a lot of problems for people who break those ships. Ships have a lot of toxic chemicals and liquids in them. Rich countries won't do it. Dump it somewhere else, right? So it's not economical to do this in the rich countries. The more industrialized countries become, the more we keep talking about circular economy. We need to reuse. The more linear they become, if you take it on a global scale, the more linear they become. Actually, they're not becoming circular. They're becoming more linear. Dump it somewhere else. That is a huge problem, and that requires change in strengthening the institutions in poorer countries. One classic case I remember is Glencore. I don't know how many of you have heard of Glencore. Anyone here heard of this large company called Glencore? It is a Swiss company. It is one of the largest commodities company in the world. And Glencore has a copper mining plant in Zambia. Okay. And that mine in Zambia has the worst technologies, the lowest environmental monitoring, whatever, and all that. Copper mine is creating a lot of disaster. But if they implemented the same plan, for example, in Europe, they would use the topmost technology, they would use the best technology, because that's what the governments are mandated there. Okay. And okay, you're doing it in Zambia, so your industries, your factory, your plant is not very complex and not sophisticated because the local rules don't mandate it, and then you're polluting the water, you're polluting the air, you're affecting local people as a result of it. Right? So we dump our problems in other countries. Everyone is trying to dump their problems in the poor. All the rich countries are trying to consume more, but create problems elsewhere. That's what is happening in today's world, in my opinion. And that is why we have this whole environmental crisis. We want to become more circular, but individual countries, in my opinion, are still very linear in thinking. Okay. Right. Okay. Sahil, does it answer your question, Sahil, to an extent? The thinking, at least. A bit of reflection there.
Oh, yes, those were the quite examples which were interesting. So, yeah.
Fab. Okay. Dr. Jaising, can we take a 10-minute break now and we'll come back?
Yeah, sure, sir. We can come at 2:15 as per the schedule.
Sure. So that'll be 9:45 my time.
Yes.
Yeah, sure. I'll still be here. I'll just mute myself and keep my camera off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. 2:15.